Assassin's Creed Unity was marketed to be one of the most revolutionary additions to the franchise to date, no pun intended. But does it live up to its own hype, or did it end up setting itself to the chopping block? Hey guys, I'm RockTheGolem, and seeing as how I finished liberating France from the grip of the Templars, I'm here to bring you my review of Assassin's Creed Unity. So here's how it all works. I'll be judging the game based on 5 different categories: the story, the characters, the gameplay, the graphics, and the soundtrack and effects. Each category will be given a score on a scale of 0 to 2 using half-point increments. After all the categories have been judged, I'll tally the numbers together and we'll have our final score for this review. For any who have not played this game, this is a review, so consider this to be your spoiler warning. Having said all that, let's get this review started. Our adventure begins when we first begin to play the game, obviously. Initially taking on the role of a gamer playing on a system developed by Abstergo called Helix. With only Chapter 1 available to us, we begin playing as a Templar under the command of Jacques de Molay, a Templar Grand Master who we later learn is actually a sage that was burned at the stake by King Philip IV. Assassins are attacking, trying to steal the Sword of Eden and its companion book. However, we manage to stop the assassin and lock both relics away in a vault, only to be assassinated as we exit. The chapter ends with our game being hijacked by 2 assassins who call themselves Bishop and Deacon, asking us for help. They introduce us to Project Phoenix, which is Abstergo's plan to find beings with triple helix DNA codes, known as sages, to create a genome that closely resembles the greater beings that came before us. After agreeing to help, the assassins link us up to memories of Arno Victor Dorian, an assassin that was believed to have come in contact with a sage during his life. We first encounter Arno as a child, waiting for his father while in a meeting. Being the mischievous boy that we are, we end up wandering off and meeting Elise, the girl who eventually will grow up to become our troublemaking love interest. Eventually our fun ends when we hear the sound of panic. Arno returns to where he was supposed to have been waiting, only to find that his father has been murdered. Fast forward years later, Arno has been adopted by Elise's father. Little do we know at this time though, Monsieur de la Serre is actually the Templar Grand Master, and Elise is about to be fully inducted into the Order at a celebration that we were not invited to. Arno is given a letter that must be delivered to Monsieur de la Serre directly. However, Arno decides to leave it under the door of his office so that he can make his own plans to sneak in and see Elise. After seeing her, he attempts to sneak out and comes across Monsieur de la Serre's body in the courtyard, murdered. Arno is mistaken to be the killer and is thrown in jail. There he meets Bellic, an assassin that decides to train Arno after he displays an ability to see the unseen using eagle vision. Eventually the two escape, with Bellic leaving an open invitation for Arno to join the Brotherhood. Arno first attempts to return to Elise, but is turned away when she reveals that the letter that he was supposed to deliver to Monsieur de la Serre contained a warning that his life was in danger. Elise explains that they can't be together because she's the daughter of a Templar and he's the son of an assassin. Arno eventually joins the Brotherhood, making no attempts to hide that he is doing so to track down Monsieur de la Serre's killers. Arno ends up tracking down key members of the Order, and even reveals a plot within the Templars by Francois Thomas Germain, a French silversmith and sage, to overthrow the current hierarchy and establish a new one with him as the Grand Master. Arno discovers that Germain is the one who ordered the murder of Monsieur de la Serre, and that the warning came from the current Grand Master, La Freniere, who Arno kills before he realizes the existence of the plot. Arno is then reunited with Elise, who is being hunted by Germain's Templars. She's brought before the Brotherhood in order to help, but this causes unrest within the assassins. Mentor Mirabeau wishes to help Elise and Arno, so that when the time comes, if Elise is ever to be named Grand Master, the assassins will have a friend at the head of the Templars. Bellic decides to take matters into his own hands though and murders Mirabeau, telling Arno that the assassins have lost their way and that the leadership must be built from the ground up, just as Altair and Ezio had done before. Arno refuses to join him in this new Brotherhood, and the two of them engage in a fight that results in Bellic's death. Arno and Elise eventually track down Germain at the execution of King Louis XVI. However, Arno passes up an opportunity for vengeance in order to save Elise's life, a decision that she actually disagrees with, causing her to once again send him away from her. Having learned about what he's done, the Brotherhood strips Arno of his title and his equipment, choosing to exile him from Paris. Arno returns to Versailles, where he spends his days in a drunken stupor, until Elise comes to find him and convince him to return to a Paris that has started to tear itself apart in his absence. Arno re-equips and helps Elise track down Germain's man in charge of maintaining the chaos, Maximilien de Robespierre. After discrediting him in the eyes of the public, Arno and Elise track down Robespierre in his office. Elise shoots him in the mouth in what is possibly her most epic moment, and forces him to write the location of Germain. Arno confronts him at the top of the temple, only to find that Germain is wielding the same sword of Eden we saw before meeting Bishop and Deacon. Germain escapes to the crypt, where the sword in the book had originally rested, and the final battle ensues. Despite Elise's help, every attempt to kill Germain ends with Arno being forced back. Arno is eventually pinned under rubble, and is unable to fight for a few moments. Elise leaves him to face Germain alone, and Arno eventually frees himself and runs to help Elise, but he can't make it to her in time. The Sword of Eden lets off an explosion of energy, mortally wounding Elise and incapacitating Germain. Arno draws his wrist blade and slowly pierces Germain through the neck, revealing memories that show Germain's plan to purge the Templar Order of all who had forgotten the teachings of Jacques de Molay. The game finally fasts forward to Arno, now in his Master Assassin garb, explaining how his understanding of the Creed has changed, while also promising to watch over Paris and keep Elise's memory alive. Eventually, Arno returns to the crypt where Germain's skeleton lays undisturbed. He removes it from the crypt and places it among the myriad of bones and skulls in the catacombs of Paris. We receive one final transmission from Bishop and Deacon, who are convinced that Abstergo will never find Germain's body now, and that it would be useless to them anyway, even if they could. For the most part, the story is pretty compelling, although somewhat predictable. I was almost able to tell who the villain was, and not just because of his two colored eyes, but also the way he behaved when I confronted him. The only sort of real unpredictability came from Elise, who never seemed to plan anything completely, and Bellic, who was quite possibly the only one to successfully pull off a secret mission. I was able to see everything coming, either because of the way people acted or because of the pacing of the game. I wouldn't say it took me out of the illusion of being Arno, but at the same time, it made things feel a little lackluster. In a game that allows us to solve murders as part of the series of missions, I would have liked to have a bit more mystery surrounding the life of Arno. Even still, the story is still well told and enjoyable, especially for a veteran Assassin's Creed player. For me, the characters of the game is one place where Unity falls short. Arno feels like a one-trick pony. He's always breaking and entering, stealing stuff, and he has this predisposition for vengeance. The character doesn't truly evolve and grow as a person until the very end of the game, and it's only seen for the few minutes of cutscene we're treated to before the credits begin to roll. And to be honest, the only real connection I felt with him was in the fact that everyone he cares about ends up dying, and that all he's eventually left with is the Brotherhood itself. But that's how every assassin starts out in each of the games, losing everything and having to build themselves back up from almost nothing. Arno started out this way as well, just in his own way, but over the course of the game we see it happen again to him over and over. He loses every father figure he had and the love of his life as well. I guess in a way that leaves him a better assassin, because now all he has to live for is the Creed, or at least his version of it. Despite wearing Master Assassin's garb, we never actually find out if he officially rejoins the Assassins or if he's just using his training on his own. I really felt it hard to connect to Arno outside of feeling bad for him, and I don't want to have to pity my main protagonist in order to feel for him. Elise is another character I couldn't connect with, and at times I found her annoying to the point where I was wondering why we bothered to hang around with her. In my playthrough, I jokingly referred to her as Taylor after saying that young Elise looked like a Harlequin, because my friend Taylor has a channel called Harlequin Plays. But once again, that's where the connection ends. Elise was annoying, she caused more issues than she solved, and at the end of the day, she served no real purpose above what any underground informant could have done. We honestly could have just made her into a side character that was Arno's love interest, and created another character to give Arno the information he needed to carry out his missions. And that's not a good thing when you're trying to establish a main character like this. Even when Elise was helping, she never actually did anything to really help. And in an era of video games where people are calling for stronger female characters, Elise falls horribly short. She does have her one moment of awesomeness where she shoots Robespierre in the jaw, but that's it. Honestly, give me Mary Read or Anne Bonny from Black Flag any day. Germain turned out to be an interesting, although somewhat predictable villain. It was interesting to see his plans unfold, but I knew he was the bad guy from the first moment he stepped out of his carriage. Not just because of his eyes, but the expression on his face as well. He gave off that sort of villainous feeling, which was only confirmed by the way he acts when he and Arno first talk, saying that they can't go out one door and that they have to escape out the back so that no one will see him. If we as an audience were meant to get that uneasy feeling and think that he might actually be the villain, then I have to give credit to his voice actor because it worked like a charm for me. When he made that moment of hesitation and told Arno that we couldn't go that way, it clicked with me right away that this guy was up to no good and was more than likely the villain. To be honest, the only other character worth mentioning is Bellic, who was actually one of my favorite characters. He made no qualms about expressing how he felt about people, freely switching between calling Arno a pisspot or an assassin based on how happy he was with him. Although he was something of a radical traditionalist, Bellic was one of the only ones other than Arno who seemed to have the stomach for immediate action, rather than gambling and taking risks by trying to form alliances and treaties. He was just one of those characters that was like a constant within the story, and the fact that he was that solid of a character made him more appealing to me. A lot of historical figures also fill the list of notable characters, but they're not around long enough for us to care. Napoleon himself ends up playing a small role in the story, but wouldn't you think he would have more of a spotlight on him? You know, similar to how Leonardo da Vinci had with Ezio, across 2 games actually. But Napoleon only appears a handful of times in the main storyline, one of which is actually during that ending cinematic before the credits. If you want to get to know him, you actually have to play his side story missions, which ultimately have no bearing on the story. They're just sort of there to help advance Arno's equipment and money pool. I feel as though characters like Bellic and Napoleon should have had more direct interaction with Arno, and that even Germain's reveal as the villain would have been better if we had spent more time acting on his behalf as Arno, because then it would feel more like betrayal instead of just a surprise reveal. As I said, the characters of this game, for me at least, just fall utterly short of the level I've come to expect from Assassin's Creed. I've always been a big fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise. It was actually one of the first games I picked up when I bought a 360. And while I've never played any of the handheld titles, I've played every available console installment from the original Assassin's Creed all the way through Unity, with the exception of Rogue. The general concept of the game remains the same. You're an assassin who receives various assignments, be it following a target to gather information, or circumventing an entire building of enemies to take down one specific target without being detected. Just like other Assassin's Creeds, mini-missions and side quests run rampant in the forms of Paris stories and murder mysteries, and there's even an opportunity to get a set of legendary armor through Nostradamus riddles. Even racing and stunt runs have been represented in the form of server bridges. Every edition of Assassin's Creed has tried to do something different. I remember how awesome I thought it was when Ezio got his second wrist blade, or when Connor was the first assassin to take to the open sea for ocean combat. Unity continued on with Assassin's Creed's tradition of pushing the limits and trying new things, and as a game it has a lot to offer. One of the biggest additions was actually character customization. Any game that includes a feature like this is almost always a welcome sight. However, I feel like Ubisoft could have done better. Like in Assassin's Creed's before, we upgrade our armor and equipment to get a slightly different look and add health and resilience. This time around, there are multiple pieces to upgrade, each one not only giving a new look but also comes with different stat buffs. And interestingly enough, that's where my issue with this system comes into play. Essentially, you have to be one of 2 types of players. The first, who just wants to look good with whatever outfit they want and just see their stats as a bonus, which is actually the category I fall into. And the other being the stat-hungry gamers who don't care how they look, They just want to have the specific stats that they want. I probably would have actually belonged to that second group if it weren't for the fact that the stats really don't have that big of an impact on my playstyle in particular. I personally looked at what pieces looked good, and then chose which ones I wanted based on how much health I got. And that was it. Everything else was just kind of a bonus to me. But that could just be the result of my playstyle, as I said before. Speaking of playstyle, Unity talked about the idea of being able to customize your abilities as well. As it turns out, that was only partially true. You could choose which abilities you wanted, but in the end, you end up having enough points to unlock all of them, especially if you do side content in addition to the main story. The only real form of customization I saw was that of the 4 special abilities that you were able to map to your directional pad down button. Those were the ability to heal yourself and your party, to disguise yourself as the enemy, to share eagle sight with other people, and the 4th one I don't recall at this time. But essentially you had to pick one of those 4 and map it to your down button. And that was it. That was really the only form of customization I saw outside of what costume you were wearing. The game itself also has a strange curve when it comes to fighting. Most fights are extremely one-sided, and it all depends on your gear. Starting out in the game, you're very squishy. I had riflemen that were able to kill me from off-screen with a single shot. But through equipment upgrades, you can eventually turn yourself into a one-man army. The only real challenge left is just remembering what tactics you need to use on a given enemy. I will say this for Assassin's Creed Unity though. Rapid descent is so much fun, especially once you get the hang of it. If you've played as many Assassin's Creeds as I have, it's going to take some time to get used to it. But once you do, you'll be navigating the city easily and as fluidly as ever. Speaking of navigating, and I know I'm probably going to be in the minority on this one, but I was actually happy to see ship combat and travel go. Don't get me wrong, I liked it in Assassin's Creed 3 when it was an option, but I couldn't stand it in Black Flag where it was your primary means of travel. It just felt slow and clunky to me. And with Unity trying to focus on speed and agility, I feel like it was the right decision to leave it out. In addition to the regular story, we now have online gameplay that allows you to form up with teams of other assassins, or rather Arnos, and do missions together. This is a huge improvement over the hide-and-seek style assassination games that we've seen in the past, and it's something fans have wanted for a long time. However, even this is not without its flaws. If one player has a bad connection and pray that it's never the one who's hosting the mission, the game becomes laggy and unresponsive. I ended up using almost half a dozen medicines to keep myself alive in a match where I was being hit by invisible enemies. My health bar never left 0, then it randomly went back up to full, only for me to be dead seconds later anyway. In addition, it took away from the enjoyment of the gameplay. But not just that, also the fact that you see 4 Arnos running around. Even if they are in different outfits and colors, it's just painfully obvious that that's still Arno, and it removed me from the illusion of the game. Honestly, if Ubisoft is going to let us customize our assassins, then let us do it completely. Which for me would mean changing how they look, how they sound, and for almost every other person out there, it means having the option of gender. That in and of itself was another big issue people had with this game, but that's a story for another day. Assassin's Creed Unity is one of the most gorgeous games I've ever played, as it should be. This is one of the first next-gen games we've seen, and the game is so graphics intensive that my PC barely passes the minimum requirements. A PC that I just bought back in September and spent over $1,700 on. The world feels massive due to the size and scale of the buildings, and the environments are constantly alive with massive crowds of people. There's a lot going on at one time, which explains why you need such a powerful system to play the game. And at first, I took issue with that. I had a bitter taste in my mouth over the fact that in order to experience the game, you either needed to pay hundreds of dollars for a new console or thousands of dollars for a new PC. But I eventually let that grudge go when I reminded myself that Ubisoft didn't try to market Unity to people as a low graphics game. They knew what they were putting out, and they made no attempts to hide that fact. If you wanted to play, you knew what you were getting into, and overall, the game looked incredible. You know, when the graphics actually worked, and herein lies the problem with the graphics. Unity was plagued with graphics issues from day one, and that's one of the biggest things people think of when it comes to this game. I personally experienced issues with Arno falling through the world map, dropping inside of buildings that weren't rendered on the inside, which then made it impossible for me to escape, and even getting stuck hovering in mid-air when I tried to use a rapid ascension rope. Even characters' hair wouldn't sit still on their own heads. They jumped around almost as if though, someone had them attached to mannequin strings and they were tugging on them from above. If you do an image search online, you'll actually find a plethora of glitches where characters were missing their faces, and dead characters were laying on the ground in either completely unrealistic positions or their bodies were skewed horribly out of proportion. While some of these issues were actually game-breaking, all of them took away from the experience of being Arno and running around France. How can Ubisoft expect the player to become immersed in this world they've created when the world is literally falling apart around you? I would personally much rather the game have been delayed so that these issues could have been fixed and never, if not rarely, encountered. Instead, these glitches turned out to be the focal point for gamers and has forever left a black mark not only on Unity, but on the Assassin's Creed franchise in and of itself. For as much as I would like to give the graphics a higher score than I have, I just can't justify doing so. You can have the prettiest graphics known to man, but it means nothing if the game doesn't work because of them. I loved listening to the music in Assassin's Creed Unity. It perfectly set the mood to the point where it blended in seamlessly with what was going on. At no time did I ever say to myself, wow, this music sounds terrible. The accompaniment to every scene was spot on, and I know a lot of people will say that nothing stood out either, but in all honesty, it shouldn't. Music should be what helps to set the mood and help keep you there, not be so over the top or lackluster that it makes you stop and say, wow, this music is yada yada yada. The only time I stopped to listen to anything musical was when I passed by a bar or a crowd that was singing. And I didn't just personally stop to listen, I made Arno stand still so I could enjoy it. I loved stopping to listen to whole crowds of people sing in French, especially because of the fact that these were all legitimate songs, and they just sounded fantastic coming from these random crowds. None of the sound effects felt out of place either, which means they were all doing their job as well, and the voice acting was superb, just like I mentioned before with Germain. Okay, I know it probably seems like I don't have a lot to say about this part, especially after giving it such a good score compared to the other categories, but in all honesty, there's nothing that really needs to be said. Audio-wise, everything is doing its job, and it's doing it extremely well. There's really not much more to say about it than that. Assassin's Creed Unity is far from perfect like Ubisoft would like you to think, but it's also far from the atrocious mess that many gamers would have you believe it to be. Obviously, you know things went bad when Ubisoft went ahead and gave away free copies of other games as a way of compensating their faithful customers for a botched launch. And ultimately, that was its biggest hindrance on getting a better score. The game was simply not ready. I can deal with having a dull cast of characters as long as the game itself is fun to play. But the graphics issues took away from the illusion of the story and oftentimes broke the game completely. I can't judge the game too harshly for the simple fact that this is a Generation 1 title for the new gen systems. There are going to be issues because it's a new level of technology and it's untested waters. Even still, those waters should have been tested more, and I would much rather have seen the game delayed a few months and to have those issues eliminated completely. Assassin's Creed Unity gets a 7 out of 10 from me. This game is extremely fun, especially now that Ubisoft has released a few patches and fixed things up a little. I'm sure there are still flaws to be encountered, but that can be said about any game. If you're a fan of the series, I say that you'll be more than happy with adding this game to your library. However, PC gamers, be warned. Make sure that you check your hardware against the requirements, because you might end up having a bad time if you don't. So, what do you guys think about this review? Did I give the game a fair score? Are there any points I missed? Do you strongly agree or disagree with anything I've said here? Leave a message in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this review, and if you stuck with me through my entire playthrough of this game, you're awesome. I'll see you guys on the other side. Take care.